And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Ryan Metzler.
Hey everyone, it's Ryan Metzler here again, and today we're going to take a look at another Gen Con release. This time we're going to take a look at Spyrium. Now this is a game for 2 to 5 players from Asmodee, and it's by designer William Adia of Caelus fame. Caelus, one of my favorite games. So I'm really excited to check this one out. We'll see what you get inside of the box, how the game plays, and just a really quick thing. It's a worker placement and worker removal game, so something we've seen a little bit of recently. But we'll take a look at how Spyrium plays and what the components are, and then we'll come back here at the end and get my opinions of it. So here you can see Spyrium set up for a 3-player game. Now the game plays anywhere from 2 to 5, but we're going to look at a 3-player game in order to just kind of get the idea of how the game works. Now, what we're looking at here is one player's supplies down here. They have a card which tells them everything they get on it, as well as some of the costs you'll need to know throughout the game. They have 3 workers, which they start the game with, 2 Spyrium, which is kind of a resource in the game, and then some money, which of course is another resource in the game. Spyrium and resource and workers being the 3 real resources you'll be using. In addition, there are 2 other players which have the same things over here. I haven't laid them all out because I'm just going to use them as kind of examples, but you'll see how they work throughout the game. Over on this side over here, we're looking at kind of a template that tells you how to play. It tells you that there are 2 different kind of phases in each round. There's phase 1, where you're going to be placing workers, potentially using the event for the turn, or moving to phase 2. So that's what these 3 little symbols mean. And then once you've moved to phase 2, there are different actions you can take. Removing workers to activate a card or buy a card, using the event for the turn, which you can do in either phase 1 or 2, or activating one of your buildings that you've already built in order to get an event. So that's going to tell you how to play the game. In addition, you see we have several tracks. Victory points here, the residential track here, which will be used either for getting money at the start of the turn or for getting victory points during turns, and then various other workers you can get, as well as a supply of tokens and various other things. The center of the board here is composed of cards. Now you'll see that there are 9 cards laid out in a grid here, a 3x3 grid of 9 cards. And then there's a deck of cards labeled A here. Now this game plays out over 6 turns, and turns 1 and 2, well, 1, 2, and 3 actually, we'll be using cards from deck A. After that, turns 4 and 5, we'll use cards from a different deck, deck B. And then the last turn, and the last turn only, we'll use cards from deck C, and there are only 9 cards in this deck. So you always get to see all of the cards in deck C, but they're all kind of end-game scoring cards or things that just provide a bunch of points. So the game will change a little bit as you go on, but each round is going to be conducted like the one I'm about to show you, and then the cards will change throughout the game, but the idea will remain much the same. So the idea here is that at the start of each turn, each player is going to get income equal to their residence. So at the beginning of the game, each player will get 2 income to add to their supply. After this, you'll make sure that you've got everything laid out here in the center of the grid, and that you have an event up for the turn. You see the future events here and the current event right here. Our current event says that you may pay $1, untap one of your buildings, or unincline one of your buildings, I should say, and then incline it again to use it. So basically, you can use a building that's already been used once, again. After that, you're going to start with whoever has the start player card, and they're going to start by taking actions. And their actions can be place a worker, use the event, or move to phase 2, which is removing workers. When you place workers, you're going to place them between 2 cards. So you'll see there's areas between 2 cards. Here, 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 here. You get the idea. You'll place between 2 cards. When you do so, nothing really happens. You're just placing there to kind of stake a claim to one of the 2 cards, or technically to both of the 2 cards for a period of time. So if I were to place right here, for example, I would be placing between these 2 cards and would say that I have an interest in one of these 2, or potentially both of these 2 cards when I want to activate. You're going to keep doing this in round turn order until a player decides that they want to move on to the activation phase. So maybe red places over here, and yellow decides they want to place right here, and blue, kind of comes over here and says, well, I'm actually interested in these 2 as well. And red says, I actually want to be there, and yellow comes and places right here. Maybe this is the setup for right now. So we see how this goes. And now blue says, well, I don't want to place my last worker because I have plans for him. Now, I don't know what his plans would be at this moment. He'd probably place them, but he could reserve the right to retain this worker for a future point. Maybe he gets this building and he wants to use it. So let's say that he stops right now and he decides he's going to move to phase 2, which is kind of the activation phase. When he does this, he immediately gets to take an action in that phase. So he's decided he's no longer placing any workers. He's going to move on to phase 2. Which is removing workers from the board. And this is where everything really comes into play. When you are in this phase, there's only really a couple things you can do. You can remove a worker, which I'll cover in a moment. You can use the event. I already told you what the event does. Or you can activate buildings. Well, he doesn't have any. So he's going to remove a worker right now. So when he removes a worker, he's going to choose one of the two cards on either side of that worker, and he's going to decide which one he's got an interest in. So for example, let's say he's interested in this card right here. It's a building. If it's a building, his interest means that he wants to build that building. So he removes this worker, and he says, okay, this building costs $4. In addition, it would cost one more money for each worker that's still adjacent to it after he removes his. Well, turns out that's nobody. So it's going to cost him $4. In addition to that, it's going to cost him rent. Each player's card will show them how much rent it costs for each building they build. The first building you build has 0 rent. But the second one has 1, the next one has 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way up. The more buildings you build, the more it's going to cost you to rent. So 4 plus 0 is $4. And he would buy this card for $4. In addition, you'll see on here that it's worth 3 victory points at the end of the game, and it has an ability printed on it. He may use a worker and trade into Spyrium in order to get 5 victory points. So he's going to take this, he's going to pay his $4 to the bank, and he now has a card that he can use on a future turn in order to get some victory points. After blue is done with their turn, let's say red also decides to move on to the second phase. And they say, well, I'm really interested in getting some more Spyrium, so they decide to pull off of this card here. They could either choose this building to buy the building, or they could choose to activate this person card next to them. Activating people cards does not buy them for you, it simply allows you to use their ability. And you'll see that they have tokens on them. In this case, it's always going to be 1 less token than the number of players in the game. So here, they pull off, and there's 2 players left, which means it's going to cost them $2 in order to do this. Let's just say they had their own supply of money for right now. They would pay their $2, 1 for each worker still adjacent to that card. In addition, they're going to pull one of these tokens off of here, and in this case, the high tokens are good, because taking this token off of here means that they're going to get 2 Spyrium. So they would pull that off of there, and they'd take their 2 Spyrium and add it to their supply. Spyrium being able to be turned into victory points or various other things later in the game. So that's how that's going to work. They'd pay their $2, they'd take their 2 Spyrium and remove that token. And now the next player who takes this is only going to get 1 Spyrium. Yellow would then have their chance to take a turn, and they have some interesting choices. They have some victory point cards they could take. They have a building they could use in order to move up on the residential track over here. Or they have another victory point, or they could take a Spyrium. So they have choices. So maybe they look at this one right here. This card provides victory points at the end of the game and a special ability throughout the game. But it's very expensive. It costs $6. When they buy this, let's say they pulled off, the cost would be 6 plus 1 for each worker, which there aren't any. But what it's going to do is that each of their rental spots on their board, each of the spots where they build buildings, is going to cost them 3 less. Essentially meaning the first 4 that they build are going to be free, because it's 0, 1, 2, and 3 cost. So they'd be able to take this card and put it out next to their sheet over here to show that each of their rental spaces is worth, or costs, 3 less. In addition, at the end of the game, for each building they've built, they're going to get 1 victory point to a maximum of 7. So you'll see that there's a 7 maximum victory point thing up here that they're going to be able to get from that card. So they may get this early to try and focus on building buildings. But it would, of course, cost them $6, which is a pretty big payment to make early in the game. So maybe they take that and they would put it next to their character card over here to show that they now have that ability. As you use your workers and you pull them off, you're going to make sure to set them next to your card, because workers that are still on your card are active, while workers that are next to your card are inactive, and that's an important distinction to make. So yellow would still have one on their card, and they'd have this one next to their card. After you've gone around in that, everybody's taken a turn, the next player would have their chance to take a turn. So now we'd be back to blue. And blue has an option. They can either take a Spyrium, or they can do this, buy this card over here, but they probably don't have enough money anymore. Well, I guess they do have enough money, but maybe they don't want it. Or blue could pull off in order to get money. Now, the example I have right now isn't good, but let's say that this red worker is down here. Instead of activating a card by pulling off of a worker, you can instead choose a card for which your meeple is adjacent to and gain money for that card. So for example, blue could pull off of here, and they could say, okay, well there's 1 meeple adjacent to this card. I get $1 for pulling that meeple off. I choose this card, there's 1 meeple adjacent, I get $1. If instead there had been 2 meeples adjacent, they would get $2. So basically, the more popular a card is, the more people that are placed around it, the more money you can get for pulling off of there and foregoing taking an action, which is going to be one of your primary sources of income. Alternatively, if blue did not want to pull off of there yet, they could use their remaining worker to activate their card. So what they would do is incline this card, they would use the worker, and they would pay 2 Spyrium in order to get 5 victory points. And of course, they'd be out in the lead. Now, finally, there's one more action they could have taken. That's the event. You can always take the event action, and maybe they'd do that on a future turn if they had another worker. They would be able to place their disc on here, pay $1, untap this card, and then if they had 2 Spyrium and another worker, activate it again for 5 more victory points. Getting to 8 victory points is going to get you a small bonus. You'll see that there are these tokens set out here, and when you get there, you may either get another free worker, so a worker you can add to your supply from here, and there are other cards that will get you workers, or you may get $5. So when you get here, you'll get one of those 2, and then you'll move the other token to the 20 position, and if you get to 20 victory points, you'll get that other bonus. Finally, there's one more track I want to cover over here that I haven't gone over yet, and it's activated by some of these buildings. We'll see this one here. If you build it and use it on a future turn, you can go ahead and move up on the residence track, which will move your token from here to here. Let's say red did it. They could move from 2 to 3. This would be income for their next turn. Alternatively, when they activate this, anytime you see this icon, this house icon, instead of moving up on the track, you can just take victory points equal to the number you're already on. So in this case, I could take 3 victory points if I'm already here, moving myself up 3 on this track in order to kind of advance myself in the game. Anyhow, you're going to keep going on in this manner until everybody's removed their workers or decided to pass. Maybe they don't want to activate anything anymore. They don't want to use the remaining workers that they have laying out on their card. And they're going to go ahead and pass, and you'll clear up everything on the board. Everyone will take their workers back and reactivate them. You'll clean up all of this stuff and return the tokens to the supply and any unused cards. So blue would get their worker back, yellow and red would reactivate all of their workers. And you'd remove any remaining cards. At this point, you're going to go ahead and you're going to flip out the next event, and blue gets their token back. And you'll see that the next event is that you may pay or sell 1 Spyrium for $3 or 3 Spyrium for $6. And you'll know that the upcoming event for the next round is that for $1 per person you have, you can get another person. So if you have 3, you can spend $3 to buy a new worker. And that's how you're going to get new workers into the game. So all of the buildings will reactivate, all of the meeples will go back to their people, all of these discs that are on the second phase will move back to the first phase, and you'll put out a new 9-card grid with new guys that you can use for the game. So some of them will give you the ability to use Spyrium to get victory points, or some of them will allow you to pay to move up the residence track. One of them, here, this building here, will just get you a new worker when you activate it. So you'll see and you'll lay out these new cards, and you'll have new cards for the next round. You'll play 3 rounds in Phase A, and then 2 rounds in Phase B, 1 round in Phase C, and at the end of the game, you're going to score victory points. Now, your victory point total will be the points that you get throughout the game from various effects that you use, like this one on this building. You'll also get the points that are printed on buildings, as well as any points that are printed on these scoring cards that you pick up, which are called patented ideas. You can get a maximum of 7, 1 for each token that you've collected throughout the game. And whoever happens to have the most points by building buildings, collecting points throughout the game, and getting points at the end of the game from the green cards is going to be the winner. Well, there you have it. That is Spyrium by William Adia and Asmodee. So, as I said at the beginning, I was really excited about this game because, of course, it's by the designer of Caelus. And Caelus is one of my top 20, if not top 10 games. You know, I have the list, but I haven't looked at it yet. Look for those in the future. But Spyrium was super hyped at Gen Con. Of course, everybody's excited because the designer of Caelus is coming out with a new game. It got a lot of attention, and, you know, there's been some publicity of it, you know, different reviews coming out, and so I wanted to check it out. And while the game is, or has a couple of new concepts in it, or a couple of concepts that are interesting, I wouldn't say it excited me to the level that I wanted it to, or the level that I was expecting. I went into it, of course, a little bit expecting a new Caelus. And this game is not that game. Now, it is a good worker placement game. I'm not saying that because it's not Caelus, it's not a good game. I like the concept of that if I place a worker out and you want to stop me from taking one of the 2 cards on either side of it or using its ability, you can just start piling workers around that card. And make it a little bit harder for me to take it, but if you do so, you're giving me the opportunity to take a bunch of money. Or, alternatively, I like the idea of that I can place a worker, and then if I really need to take that action, jump over to the second action phase, or the second phase, and immediately start removing workers while everybody else is still placing their workers. I can get in, place my worker, get out and take the action or building I need, and be a little bit faster than everybody else. It just didn't have anything super innovative that I was expecting it to have. Again, not saying it's a bad game. I think it's a very good worker placement game. It just doesn't live up to the hype that I think it had at Gen Con. So with that said, I do think it's something that you should definitely try out. It is an interesting Euro game and one that I would recommend other players trying. I just don't think it's something that's going to make the final cut in my own collection.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at coolstuffinc.com.